गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गना शॉट। गना शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है। वणक्कम, गुड इवनिंग, सत श्री अकाल एंड जय हिंद। आज हम बात करने वाले हैं यूथ अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट इन चाइना, उसके क्या कॉजेस हैं और उसके क्या कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस हैं। ये सब चीज के बारे में बात करने के लिए मेरे साथ बहुत तीन नौजवान हैं और उनका अध्यापक। So first, let me welcome the entire team from OP Jindal Global University on to Gunner Shot. Good evening, all of you, and welcome to Gunner Shot. Right? Let me first give a overview कि हम ये क्यों कर रहे हैं। ये मेरा तीसरा बार है when I'm having young people on Gunner Shot in a panel. इससे पहले हमने दो बार चाइना सेंटर चेन्नई सेंटर ऑफ चाइना स्टडीज में उनका रिसर्चर्स और उनका रिसर्च ऑफिसर्स के साथ हमने बात किया। अभी वी आर स्टेपिंग आउट ऑफ चाइना, मूव टू नोएडा where the team from OP Jindal Global University is here. And the whole idea is that we should be able to understand China better, a wider reach about China. And it is not only people who have got great experience in China to talk about China. That's a useless thing. We need young people to talk about China. And we need to understand China a lot more because a lot is happening in China. Plus the fact that China is our biggest neighbor, and the fact that we've had a lot of problems with China, and the fact that we share over 3,000 kilometers of a contested border with China. And notwithstanding everything, we are the two great regional powers. So understanding China is important. That's the first part. The second thing, why are we taking this topic of youth unemployment and consequences and causes? अगर आप सबको याद है, कुछ साल पहले हमारे देश के अंदर एक मंडल कमीशन हुआ करता था। जब वो मंडल कमीशन जारी किया गया था, तो लोगों को काफी आक्रोशित हो गए। They were upset. And who are upset most? The people who are upset most are the youth. And the youth feelings put the government down. Mr. VP Singh's government came down because of the problems which came forth in the Mandal Commission. Similarly, अगर आप Tiananmen Square का जो इंसिडेंट अगर आप एनालाइज करोगे, तो आपको मिलेगा कि it was the youth who came up and stood at Tiananmen Square and faced the tanks. That famous picture of one man facing a tank was a young boy at that point of time, a student. It was the students who shook up China. So why are we talking of youth today in China? Because China is going through a churn. We have seen some of the highest unemployment rates in China ever since I started reading China. Youth unemployment, people who are coming out of college, उनको नौकरी नहीं मिल रहा है। एक नया सिलसिला शुरू हुआ टंगपिंग और बाइलान, जिसके बारे में की आज बातचीत होगा, और बहुत चीजें हैं। और जो पिछले महीने हमने एक डॉक्टर क्रिस्टीना चेन फ्रॉम ताइवान, उनसे बात किया। उन्होंने बोला कि देयर इज सम सोशल unrest, but it is not critical. The question is, these things about the youth issues, it doesn't take long to go critical. Right. For this, first and foremost, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sriparna Patak, who is a professor of international relations in the OP Jindal Global University. She's been on our channel earlier. A month back, she did speak about the narrative war with China and the narratives of China. It's so great to have her back on Gunner Shot. Over to you, Dr. Sriparna. Please, these people are your students. These young, bright kids are your students. So just give a run over your view about this subject and give a small thing before we let Sukanya run away with the whole show. And
Thank you
please,
so much.
yeah,
Thank
please
you
go
so
ahead.
much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Namaskar, everyone. It's truly wonderful to be back on this great show, and this channel. And sir, you're doing an excellent job of telling people, educating people that चाइना असली में क्या है, हमारे संबंध किस तरह है, क्या challenges हो सकते हैं और क्या opportunities हो सकते हैं. तो because today's topic is something which is youth related, we have three wonderful youngsters from OP Jindal Global University in Sonipat. All three of them, Sukanya, Rakshit, and Shagun, they've had courses on China, and beyond courses also, courses or grades are not the best yardsticks, but they're extremely intelligent and hardworking, and they have worked on various aspects of China. Sukanya is a PhD scholar. Rakshit and Shagun are both pursuing their masters. But besides just being students, they've worked in think tanks, they worked in risk consultancies, they worked in research organizations. They have their varied research interests with regards to China, spanning sociological, political, bilateral, multilateral, etc. Now, because they are the youth, they bring in fresh perspectives. And China में किस तरह के हालात हैं, youth क्या भुगत रही है इस वक्त, there would be no one better to understand than understanding from three youngsters who've been following China very closely. So I will not take up too much time, because it's always better to hear it from the youngsters about an issue which plagues the youngsters. It might not be in our country, it might be in a neighboring country. Nevertheless, the youth always will have better perspective. So we'll move on to the next speaker, Rakshith Shetty. Rakshith, over to
Yeah.
you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, sir, for giving me this opportunity, and thank you, Professor. मेरा interest China में आया है because of Dr. Sriparna, and I want to give her credit, where the credit is due. But before talking about this important issue of youth unemployment, I just want to take few minutes and talk about various other issues also that the Chinese youth are, facing, especially in Xinjiang. Next slide, please. It is really so. Please, next slide.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is
Don't
really
worry.
it is really essential to acknowledge and recognize the unique and distinct challenges faced by the youth in Xinjiang. Because compared to the Han majority in China, they have a completely different set of issues. The plight of these youths in these regions, is characterized by a host of serious human rights abuses, which necessitates separate discussions to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation. Now, in Xinjiang, the youth have been subjected to an alarming array of abuses, including mass arbitrary detention and arrests, often without due process. Reports of torture and other ill treatment in custody have surfaced, which raises concerns about the well-being and dignity of the detainees. Enforced disappearances have been reported, further increasing the anxiety and distress experienced by both the youth and their families. Additionally, the region is under extensive mass surveillance, which infringes upon the privacy and freedom of the young population. Cultural and religious erasure campaigns have attempted to suppress the unique identities and heritage of the Uyghur youth, leaving a profound impact on the sense of self and belonging. The Chinese government's policies have also led to the separation of families and forced returns to China who wanted a safe life abroad. They tortured their parents, their relatives, and forced the people who settled abroad, particularly the religious minorities, to come back to China. This is their tactic, which disrupted the social fabric and caused emotional trauma for the young generation. Moreover, there are disturbing reports of forced labor and instances of sexual violence, which further compound the already dire situation. And violations of reproductive rights have also come to light, which illustrates, a deeply concerning disregard for dignity and autonomy of young people. You can see in the right part of this slide, the man basically, the youth, the young man basically, describes us the one of the ways that the party actually tortured him during the detention center. And in the live and in the left side, you can see a kid who has been, forced to raise himself in such a situation where he has been, constantly under mass surveillance and persecuted, tortured. His family is persecuted and tortured. So it's a really sad state in those particular regions. So coming back to mainland China, the Han majority that we are talking about. So please next slide. Let's talk about the condition of education there. In China, there has always been too much emphasis on tests in Chinese education. Mark Ito wrote in Prospect magazine that the domestic Chinese lower education system does not educate. It is a test center. And in rural China, where we have lived for 7 years, he writes, it is also an elevation system. They produce winners and losers. Winners go to college or university to take business studies, whereas losers go back to the farm or the local factory their parents were hoping they could escape. high dropout rates and school weariness in China. A study released in May 2010 by the Institute of Rural Education at Northeast Normal University found that the dropout rate in some of the rural areas was as high as 40%. And another surveys of 17 junior high schools in 14 counties in 6 provinces in China found that even in relatively prosperous areas, the dropout rates could sometimes hit 40%. And this report attributed the high dropout rate due to school weariness, that is fatigue and distress caused by rote learning and cramming. Teen suicides in China linked cutthroat to school system. In a new blue book published by Chinese non-profit organization 21st Century Education Research Institute, researchers have closely examined 79 elementary and middle school suicide rates from 2013 and found that almost 92% occurred after a teen had endured stress associated with school. In some cases, an argument with teacher. Some 63% occurred in the later half of the school year when students usually experience more stress due to high school and college entrance exams. Poor education in rural areas. According to the Chinese media, pupils from the countryside made up to 60% of those sitting in national college entrance last exam, but only 17% of those sitting enter the elite Tsinghua University. So the selection criteria from the rural areas are very strict. I mean, if you are a Chinese coming from rural area, it's very difficult to enter into elite university. Let's talk about education gap in China. China requires the vast majority of students to take the national college entrance exam in their home province, the Gaokao. And elite universities allocate higher admission quotas to first year cities like Beijing and Shanghai. And one researcher showed that an applicant from Beijing is 41 times more likely to be admitted to Peking University, which is again one of the elite universities, as compared to a fellow student from the poor and largely rural province of Hui. Sale of school files in China. This is something really interesting. Now, everyone in China who has been to high school has a file, a sealed envelope stamped top secret containing grades, test results, evaluations by fellow students and teachers, and if they have one Communist Party application and a proof of college degree. Now, student files are proven moneymaker for corrupt state workers. In May, the former head of the township government in Hunan province admitted that he has paid more than $7,000 to steal the identity of a classmate of his daughter, so his daughter could attend college using the classmates' records. And the bribery in Chinese schools mostly happens during admissions and during the examination. One more important issue is the replacement of Tibetan and Mongolian language with Chinese at Tibetan and Mongolian schools. Now, the Chinese has displaced Tibetan as the main teaching medium in schools in Tibet, despite the existence of laws aimed at preserving the languages of minorities. And a policy announced on August 2020, ahead of the start of the new school year, required school to use new national textbooks in Chinese, replacing Mongolian language textbooks. And the last statement, that is contemporary history in China is not an academic subject, is not my argument. It's an argument made by the history professor in one of the elite universities in China. He mentions how the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution and many of the main narratives within Chinese history have been omitted from the textbooks, and how repressions and persecution of minorities and a generation of historically inaccurate narratives have been created to substantiate and justify CCP's agenda. So please, next slide. Let's talk about other issues also. Shagun will give a more brief on these things. Toxic work culture. I'll just go through it. Moonlight clan. Basically, what this term means is this term was coined in Taiwan. This term means that the youth in China are financially broke at the end of each month. An estimated 40% of young singles who live in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen are living paycheck to paycheck, according to a local report. There have been instances where interns have been, exploited. And I'll give you one instance. On December 2021, a 23-year-old window employee collapsed and later died while walking home from past midnight. And less than 2 weeks later, in the same company, an engineer surnamed Tan, who had been working for the company for about 6 months, died after suicide after taking leave from the firm and returning to his hometown. This became a huge social media issue where people were talking to people were tweeting, not tweeting but preaching on the social media that these such practices should be banned. Limited work-life balance. A survey by China Economic Life Survey, which was released by China Central Television, showed that 40% of the respondents have 1 to 3 hours of leisure time per day, while 25% have less than 1 hour. And there's always the pressure to succeed in front of the parents, right? I mean, the toxic Gaokao exams and the importance to clear the exam leads to a lot of suicides in China. Lack of employment security, gender discrimination. I mean, China is ranked 107th out of 153 countries in terms of gender equality in the workplace. This is by World Economic Forum 2020 report. And rigid hierarchical structure. I mean, traditional Chinese workplace culture often emphasizes respect for authority and a top-down management approach. Now, the sad part about it is that this hinders open communication and feedback, stifling creativity and innovation among young employees, and limited opportunities for skill development. The thing in China is that they are moving up the value chain in the areas of production. China has been the factory of production, right? Mass production. China is slowly moving above the value chain and pushing its lower and cheap goods to Southeast Asia. So the thing is, whoever the employees who were trained in producing cheap products are actually left jobless now because there are so limited opportunities for skill development and new fresh graduates are being hired. And the last part, dual income, no kids lifestyle basically means a household in which there are two incomes and no children. Everyone talks about China's economic rise, but it has also meant skyrocketing for homes, education, childcare, making social mobility and the ability to provide a good education for children more difficult. A raising a single child in China is to $309,000 in 2020 compared to $233,000 in the US, according to a media report. China's hyper-competitive schools and workplaces have given rise to movements like lying flat, which Sir has mentioned, Taiping and Bailan, which symbolize young people's growing rejection of its cutthroat systems. And some young Chinese are rejecting marriage altogether, vowing to stay single, pushing China's new marriages to a record low of 7.6 million in 2021. This figure is taken from the Chinese Ministry of Civil Affairs. This number is really low when compared, I mean, among decades. I mean, this has been a very low number. And one of the main reasons is, again, which Dr. Pathak mentioned in one of my class, that they are expected to take care of their parents and the children. So it gets really financially burdensome to, marry and have children. The government is also trying to add in 2016, as Shagun mentioned, there was the one child policy. In 2018, a professor actually proposed to tax the couples, DINK couples, double income, no kids couples, which triggered a wave of online criticism. In 2021, Beijing again introduced a three-child policy, ending a two-child policy that has failed to raise the country's declining birth rates and began discouraging abortions. The local governments, meanwhile, are offering cash subsidies for couples that have several kids, in addition to perks like discounts on in vitro fertilization and preferential housing policies. Next slide, please, sir. So the National Bureau of Statistics said that June month's unemployment rate for those aged between 16 to 24 was almost 20%, which Shagun mentioned, which was less than half of what Peking University professor Zhang expected. Now, Professor Zhang noted in an online article in Caixin, a reputable financial magazine, that if 60 million non-citizens are lying flat at home or relying on their parents were included, the figure might have actually been as high as 46.5%, double the official figures, right, which is 20%, more than double. Professor Zhang, of course, he's an associate professor of economics at the National School of Development, but her essay, which was published, has currently been taken down by the CCP. The government's hardline coronavirus. So, what are the factors? I mean, what are the reasons for this unemployment crisis? Many people only focus on the coronavirus and the conditions caused due to the pandemic. And this is exactly what the Chinese government want the youth to believe, that everything happened because of the pandemic. But the government's hardline coronavirus strategy has led to layoffs, while its regulatory crackdown, one of the important factors on real estate and education companies, has hit the private sector. According to the China's Ministry of Education, a record number of college and vocational school graduates, some around 12 million, have entered the job market this summer. This highly educated cohort has intensified a mismatch between available roles and job seekers' expectations. One more factor. The results is an increasing legislation, young population losing faith in private companies and willing to accept lower pay in the state sector. If this trend continues, growth in the world's second largest economy stands to suffer. The sheer number of jobless under 25s amounts to 2 to 3% reduction in China's workforce, and fewer workers means, of course, lower GDP. Unemployment and underemployment also continues to impact salaries for years. A 2020 review of studies reported 3.5% reduction in wages among those who had experienced unemployment 5 years earlier. If you see this graph, you can see at the extreme left, where the bar graph is mentioned, a record number of Chinese graduates applied to be civil servants in 2022, which was not the case earlier. Unlike India, Chinese youth never preferred state services, but this actually increased because of unemployment. And in the right, where you see the trend chart, you can see that the China's pool of graduates has actually grown more than tenfold over the past 20 years. So it has been a perfect case of over education and less opportunity. Uh, so please, next slide. So I mentioned about Tangping and Bailan. For the viewers who don't know about this popular social movement in China, the phrase Tangping means lying flat, which spread through China's internet last year. The slogan involves dropping out the rat race and doing the bare minimum to get by, and reflected the desire for a better work-life balance in the face of China's slowing growth. As the unemployment situation has continued to worsen, many young people have adopted an even more fatalistic catchphrase called Bailan, that is, let it rot. So I mentioned about CPC's regulatory crackdown. Last year, China launched a regulatory crackdown on formerly high-flying sectors dominated by private companies that previously attracted ambitious young people. Now, internet companies were hit with fines for monopolistic behavior. Real estate businesses were starved of financing, and the private tutoring sector was completely entirely shuttered. Regulatory filings show that China's top five listed education companies reduced their staffing by 135,000 in the last year after the crackdown. So many job losses, and this is only the top five education companies. When we combine the numbers of real estate and other industries where CCP had regulatory crackdown, the numbers go above millions. So many have questioned, whether China's public sector units or the state-owned enterprises will be able to absorb these unemployment. But we have to understand one thing: China's economic boom has coincided with a falling share of state-owned enterprises job and unemployment, from 40% in 1996 to less than 10% pre-pandemic. Now that trend could go into reverse. The state sector already employs around 80 million people, and the figure could grow by as much as 2 million on a net basis this year. But compared with total demands for jobs, it's still relatively small. China needs private firms to hire, and that will happen only if the economy grows. Now, Chinese economists attribute the unemployment problem due to two factors: urbanization and a mismatch between the education systems and the employers' need. Hundreds of millions of workers who moved from the countryside to cities used to return to their villages during labor market slumps, acting as an economic shock absorber. Now, younger migrants increasingly stay put when they lose their jobs, pushing up urban unemployment. Second, the annual number of graduates in China has increased tenfold over the last 2 decades, which I showed in the graph, the fastest higher education expansion anywhere in the world at any time. The share of young Chinese population attending college is now almost 60% similar to developed countries. The number of vocational graduates lags far behind those receiving academic degrees. Such is the stigma around vocational education that students made a riot last year and when they were told that their university was being rebranded and as a vocational school. Now, highly educated young people are rejecting factory jobs. That's a basic mathematics problem. Young Chinese, you don't want to go to factories and work after studying so much. They want to get into service industries. According to a 2021 study of 20,000 randomly selected job seekers on Jillian's website, some 43% of the job applicants wanted to work in the IT industry, while this sector accounted for just 16% of recruitment posts. Half of the job seekers had the bachelor degree, but only 20% of the jobs required one. This is a compelling evidence of education, which I mentioned previously. So please next slide. As you can see in the left chart also, the youth unemployment is climbing despite economic recovery. And the jobless youth, when compared to different nations, China's official recorded figure still ranks below India. But when we take the Zhang's numbers, it actually shoots up to 40%, much less number. Uh, please next slide. On April 2022, China has released its first white paper, first nationwide official document focusing on its youth on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Communist Youth League of China. Now, according to this document, it mentions that the Chinese people in the new era are confident, hopeful, and responsible. It talks about belief in Marxism, communism, and socialism with Chinese characteristics. And it also mentions that the Chinese youth are strongly patriotic, nothing about the unemployment crisis. All ideas supporting the party and the state, right? But there's one important statement in this document, in this official document. It mentions that the Chinese young people seem to be the first to worry about the affairs of the state and the last to enjoy themselves, striving to be pioneers and pace setters instead. Now, this is an important statement to understand the attitude of the party regarding the unemployment crisis. Now, I'll give you one more example. The Chinese youth are struggling professionally and emotionally, of course, right? No one can deny it. Yet the Communist Party and the country's top leader, Xi Jinping, are telling them to stop thinking they are about doing manual work or moving to the countryside. They should learn to eat bitterness, as mentioned by President Xi himself, using a colloquial expression that means to endure hardships. He mentions about how he used to go to rural areas during his time and used to, eat bitterness, and that is what he expects his Chinese youth to do. I am ending my presentation here, but I also want to highlight one important thing. There has been a survey uh, of the top institutes, top five universities in China, and that survey actually revealed that the youths of China after pandemic, the Chinese youth from the top universities actually did not enroll for private sector firms. They enrolled for state services firms. I mean, the intellectuals, top intellectual students of the country. This is because of the President Xi's plan. Many of the people find that their jobs are meaningless if they are working in private sectors or any other public sector firms. As long as they are not in the party, their jobs are meaningless. So this is one another ideological shift and not just market forces at play. So this is one more important thing I wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rakshit. I think you covered a lot of ground of major issues which actually you have conveyed. First, China is changing, so the conditions are changing there. The conditions are becoming tough. It's no more that manna of heaven that you feel that you go to China and you get job and everything is coming right and nice. That's not happening.
Right.
The second thing which you have mentioned is that the system is tough and the unemployment ratios are very high, right? And for a person who's put in a lot of effort and gone through a very tough system to become a graduate and then finds himself unemployed, then the level of disappointment will only increase. And that will lead to social unrest. Whether that social unrest keels over and bubbles over is a question which we'll have to see in the next thing. Then, of course, you brought out the issue of Xinjiang, but Tibet is equally bad. Whatever they're doing in Xinjiang, they've done it already in Tibet, and there are a lot of problems in Tibet to the extent that uh, children as young as 5, 6 years are being taken away from families and being kept in separate this thing. And of course, last but not the least, uh, I want to just bring out something about China. It seems in China, everything is going on discount these days. You get a discount for having children, you also get a discount for buying furniture. So that's the way China is, and you have to view China as a system and complete discount. This is my views. Yeah, your views, Riparna, all yours.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Rakshit, for the wonderful presentation. Sir has already appreciated the way you've brought out the disparities in, say, the minority areas and amongst the Han Chinese. Two things which I just wanted to say: because of these weird policies and the weird societal conditions which have emerged in China, an actual reversal in human evolution is happening. wherein children or the youth decides to be full-time children, wherein they don't want to work and continue relying on their parents. Human evolution has been such that after a point of time, after children are educated, they move out, they have their lives of their own, etc. But now there's a reversal in that. So because of these weird situations in China, human evolution is actually being impacted. Secondly, you mentioned as to how the cow is a very difficult examination. It's the most difficult exam in the world, followed by UPSC. But then UPSC is for the people who want to go in for the job. But Kakao is for students, who have to make it to college or not make it. So as you said, winners go to college, losers go for menial jobs. So because of this, a lot of wealthy Chinese people or their parents would rather send their children abroad for education. So there's a, brain drain is actually being promoted. The society is becoming an extremely weird concoction of different policies and different weird responses to it. So thank you for bringing out these points so well and so much in detail.